the concept of what I'm saying, which is you don't have to wait till you're 65 to retire. You can get there in the next 18 months, 2 years, if you do the right things and you embrace some of this alternate stuff. Hi, my name's Salena Kulkarni, and this is Property Investory podcast.
Fantastic. Well, Salena, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. I'm extremely excited to share your story. Let's firstly start off with maybe sharing with the audience what you do, maybe your title, and since you've done so much, feel free to brag about it.
I'll keep it brief. Thanks for having me on, first of all. So I work with business owners to achieve financial freedom early using alternative strategies by giving them access to highly curated, non-traditional property investment opportunities. And, I divide my time between supporting clients and spending time finding the best deal makers and advisors out there.
Yeah, that's excellent. I'm really curious to learn a little bit more shortly in this episode to find out what these alternative strategies would be and be really, really interesting to share with the audience as well. So you mentioned you do divide your time, with your clients and, so forth, all those kind of things. Maybe just sharing a little glimpse of what your day-to-day looks like, maybe in say 60 seconds or less.
Yeah, great question. I kind of feel it's really important to walk your talk. So I have a lot of spanks on my diary. I generally don't start work before 10 in the morning, and I'm usually gone by 3, and I don't work Fridays. I've learned that if I want to be effective and I want to help people, I've just got to, be very focused when I do come in. But I love just talking to people one-on-one about where they're at, where they're stuck, because I've spent a lot of time doing a lot of different things. I've got a great capacity to diagnose where people are experiencing friction. And then on top of that, I think my superpower is probably making friends with people. So I've got the thing I'm probably most proud of is I've got a fantastic network of really A-grade people who support me in the program and the work that I do.
Fantastic. Well, that's really exciting, actually. Now we're going to jump into more of the details shortly. All right. Well, let's get to know you personally, Salena. And I'd love to delve back and jump into your story a little bit. Firstly, share with the audience where you grew up.
So I was actually born in the UK, and we migrated to Australia when I was 9. My ethnic origins is I'm actually Indian, but never really grew up there. And we moved to a small town called Lithgow, which I'm sure many of you know, and then eventually settled in Canberra. I think my path to where I am today has been very meandering, but I had originally wanted to become a vet, but realized I just didn't have the stomach for blood and guts, and decided to study accounting as a bit of a stopgap until I figured out what I really wanted to do. But it was probably, my father's illness when I was about 10 that was probably the subconscious driver to understand how to build a great relationship with money, because I saw the impact that his illness had on him. I think accounting was kind of like, I was never a fit. So I jokingly call myself a reformed accountant now. I'm still a chartered accountant, but I've had a very meandering path to get where I am. But does that answer the question?
Yeah, it's great. I'm actually curious a little bit more to learn about the change or the migration from, say, UK to Australia, because you're there obviously for 9 years when you grew up there. I'm curious, what was the childhood like over in the UK before you moved?
Oh, look, I would say it was idyllic. We lived in a small country town. There would have been, I would guess, maybe 300 people in this town. There was one fish and chip shop and one tiny supermarket, and that was all. And, the move to Australia came because during that period of time, it was, I don't know if you know much about the Thatcher years, but it was a pretty grim time to be living in the UK. Unemployment was very high. My father was a double engineering degree holder, but had been unemployed for 6 months. And I think he saw an opportunity to come to Australia and took it and saw it as an opportunity to get a fresh start. But I mean, we literally came here with, a handful of suitcases and nothing else. And we moved into a govy house in Lithgow. It was, I don't have any bad memories of it whatsoever, but, I knew that it would have been pretty rough by modern standards. We had a small kerosene heater. It was freezing cold all the time. But it
Still is
was
at this time of year too.
still is, yeah. But look, I have great memories of Lithgow. And then it was probably around that time in transitioning to Australia that my dad found out that he had a major illness and told that he only had a few months left to live. And so he took the opportunity to move us to Canberra, where his primary concern was how were we going to survive after he passed. But fortunately for him, some technology was created and he got told, you've got another 3 months. And then it became another 3 months. And, I think, ultimately he went on and lived another 30 years, which was the shocking part. But
Wow.
the technology that kept him alive, no one really knew much about it. So we didn't know, but it definitely, flicked a switch in him. So, and my parents both really sheltered my sister and I from all of that. So we didn't know. But when he was diagnosed, we sort of saw the change, the overnight change in him. He went from pretty happy-go-lucky to completely preoccupied with money and whether there'd be enough.
Wow, that is an
Yeah.
inspiring story from there. I'm really also wondering, like, then if you lived out for another 30 years, there must have been a huge impact on, how everything must have changed. Because if he was told he only had 3 months, he must have been doing whatever he could to provide.
Oh, totally. You don't realize until you're staring death in the face what matters. And, I think the lesson that I took from all of that was I never want to be in a situation where I've got to worry about money. But, I think it was probably more subconscious. At the time, I don't remember being too, obviously I was connected to the fact that he might not be with us for very long, but, the fact that he went on to, I think he got the Guinness Book of Records world record for
Wow.
survival with this condition past a certain point. So, yeah, it was a difficult time, but, I never felt like I was missing out on anything or in need of anything.
Yeah. So, taking a step back, then you lived in the UK for about 9 years, so you would have gone to at least kindergarten and sort of school for a few years there. What was the life there like?
Look, it was very innocent. One of the things that I love about the UK, which we don't seem to have here in Australia, is they provide hot school lunches.
Oh,
It's almost as if that's the norm, and only the posh kids got to bring a lunchbox with a sandwich and apple from home.
that's the
Um,
opposite
I
here.
know, I know. So, I remember begging my mum every now and then to let us take a lunchbox. But yeah, otherwise we got, even at the poorest of poor schools, they would provide a hot lunch every day. And it was, I guess depending on the school, it was either great or it was okay. But I have great memories of the only thing I remember that left a very strong impression on me was the liver that they used to serve
Oh,
with gravy, and that was the only meal that we all used to balk at. But otherwise, it was all really good food. But no, I've got great. I think the only probably dark cloud that I remember from that time is it was definitely a time of I would say ethnic intolerance. And I do remember being teased quite a lot. And so and even, at times when I was young, experiencing sort of racism. But, um, it's one of those things. I think my nature is to focus on remembering the good stuff. So I have a bit of a shocking memory for specific bad experiences. But yeah, in general, I think it was a great experience.
that's excellent. And then moving over here into Australia, you stayed in Lithgow for a little bit, then moved to Canberra. What was that like living in Canberra?
Look, again, like Canberra has come a long way since the early 80s. I still, perhaps I wouldn't have settled here if circumstances hadn't unfolded the way they did. But, back then it was just a nice place to live. It was very much a government town, very public service sort of mentality. But life was pretty simple here. There was a very, very small Indian community here. Everybody knew everyone. And, it was life as usual. We rented for a long time, and then eventually, I think later on we bought. But, I had no ill feelings towards Canberra. I still feel Canberra is one of Australia's best kept secrets as a place to live. But my memory of Canberra was it was just a very simple life, probably no different to many other towns.
Yeah. And during that time, say you finished school and so forth, did you actually go out into the workforce straight away, or did you continue further education studies?
So I went to ANU and studied commerce economics, and then moved to Sydney and started my career with Deloitte. And it was kind of like, just unconscious career, evolvement at that point. I did accounting as a stopgap, couldn't figure out anything else I wanted to do. So I thought I'll finish this, got a job offer at Deloitte at a time when jobs were pretty thin on the ground. There was, we were in the midst of a recession. Even at that time, Deloitte had just had massive redundancies internally. So, we were being brought on as the grads for slave labor. And, during that time, I definitely, I gave a pound of flesh for the first couple of years while I did my chartered accountancy designation and worked. And, it was really hard. Like, it was fun. It was so much fun, but, it was not uncommon to start work at 8 in the morning, finish somewhere between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m., go home, study, and then get up and do it all again. But I guess when you're young, you just do it. Everybody else did it, so you just did it.
Yeah. And when you think about it, when kids party hard and they go all night, it's kind of no different in that sense because we can last for that long. I mean, not back
Totally.
then, but for us now, I can't imagine doing that
Oh,
at
there's no
all.
way. Yep. No, I
Oh,
think I definitely chewed through a lot of fuel at that point.
yeah, absolutely. So I guess from that point onwards, how long were you actually working at Deloitte's for?
So I think I was there just over 3 years, got my chartered accountancy, and then, it was sort of a trend at that time to go overseas and do a gap year. And
Mm,
I had gone into the workforce when a lot of my friends had gone traveling. So
yeah.
when I finished that, I decided to go traveling the world. And, I kind of feel like I might have done it the right way around, because back then, I had friends working in pubs and things like that for £3 to £5 an hour. And I went into the workforce as a chartered accountant, and I was earning mega bucks, doing amazing roles. Like, going overseas really gave me an insight into how the world sees Australians. Like, we're definitely perceived as having a fantastic work ethic. And so it was very easy to be kind of pulled out as a bit of a diamond in the rough amongst a whole lot of prospective employees. And I worked in some super senior roles for my age that I would never have had that opportunity to do if I'd stayed in Australia. So on the career level, the move overseas really catapulted my career in terms of money and work, and still gave me that freedom to travel and do what I wanted to do. So that was a fabulous experience. And I did that for another 3.5 odd years
Wow.
before I kind of said, okay, I'll come back to Australia.
So which countries did you go to while you're traveling for those
Uh, I
working?
worked I worked in London, I worked in New York and Hong Kong, parts of Europe.
Mm,
I worked for some big multinationals. I always found part of the challenge for me with accounting was I can do the detail, I just really don't enjoy it. Um, so the roles that I used to be attracted to were more where I was kind of like the liaison between the business and the accounting department, or the business and the IT department. And I think I've got a natural interest in problem solving and, the elegance of solutions. So, I found myself in lots of roles where I was sorting out problems.
I love that, and I'm very similar to you. I think because I love seeing a problem, and then I just can't have. I have the urge to solve it as soon as I find one, and that's what I've done a lot in the project management days as well too. So it's fascinating to be able to hear that side. And since you went back to London as well, did you actually go and visit your hometown as well? And did you have any family over there as well?
No family, because and that was part of the challenge I always felt for my parents, were it was just the four of us. I mean, we've got quite a bit of extended family settled here in Canberra now, but my parents had no support, no help from anyone.
Mm,
So when I went back to the UK, I did go back to the town that I grew up in, which sadly had been extremely overdeveloped.
mm,
Um, Lots of new housing estates, lots of all the fields and trees and places that I spent time as a kid were all gone. And the primary school felt like tiny, microscopic. I almost couldn't believe that, that there were so many of us that fit in that school. But yeah, look, it was a really, I really loved it as an experience, but it was also sad to see, I'm a very sentimental and nostalgic kind of girl. And so, yeah, I definitely love my 70s music and, love things from the past to be the way they were.
I'm very much similar, and I love the thing because I grew up in the '80s as well, and every time I look back with my wife and have a look at the things that we grew up with, like there's '90s music and stuff like that, and go,
Totally.
wow, it is just so different to how it is now. With my kids and stuff like that, and I go, I wish you guys could try and appreciate what we had. With just a simple telephone, look at a mobile nowadays. It's like for them, they take it for granted because it's got every on it. But back then,
Absolutely.
we were not able to just pick up a phone and instantly call or message people. You actually had to, dial a phone, especially even with the internet, when you think about it, that all those dial-up modem speeds, it took a while. Now everything's like
Absolutely.
that.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more.
A lot has changed. Wow. So I guess going back over to London and experiencing for yourself what that was like, you obviously did a little bit of traveling and so forth. And you did that for about 3 to 3.5 years. Well, I guess why did you decide to come back to Australia after that time?
Look, it was probably family based. My dad wasn't in the best of health, and I kind of felt like I'd been away for over 6 years at that point, and just wanted to spend a little bit of time here, and maybe relocate. The plan had been to move to Sydney or Melbourne. Um, but as it turned out, I just found some interesting work here, and that one thing led to another, and then I just found myself staying here. And then my now husband moved here to be with me and set up his business here. So then we got stuck. But life is long. There's plenty of opportunities, and we're definitely entering another phase where we might see ourselves moving elsewhere. Who knows?
Mm, that's fascinating. I guess from the stage that you actually were over in London and all the other countries as well that you're traveling as well, what were some of the interesting things that you may have picked up from there? Because as you said, it was a great experience. Obviously, culture would have been completely different to how Australia is. You would have picked up a lot of maybe different ideas and experiences that you could bring back and share. Are you able to share any of those with us now?
Yeah, great question. Look, I would say the experience of being over there was phenomenal from a relationship building point of view. Um, you know, Especially cities like London, which are such a melting pot of different cultures and different people. It's a very transient population. So I think one of the big takeaways that I had from that experience is a capacity to cope with change, to roll with the punches, to understand that, the one thing that's guaranteed is change. And so I think from a personal resilience point of view, I grew up a lot in that time. I think up until that point, to some degree I was, and I still am, I'm a little bit of an innocent. Um, I think back then people might have called it naivety. So I'm less naive now. I'm still innocent, but less naive. But I definitely think that experience of being out of home, having to figure out life as a grown up for myself was it's really when you decide who you're going to be and what matters to you and what your values are. Because when you're in an environment where you're being I guess, invited into different people's world's view. I think part of the challenge of young people in general is figuring out whether they align with that worldview or whether they feel differently. And I think when I was younger, I was very impressionable, but fortunately, I had enough of a moral compass to just keep me on an even keel. So, yeah, definitely a great period for personal growth and evolution.
Wonderful. So coming back to Australia, you started settled here. Your husband, or now husband, has had a business here as well. What were you doing during that time as for that period when you actually came back for Australia and visiting as well your father?
Yeah, so look, I think it had been building in me from the get-go, but I'd always had a more of an entrepreneurial streak. And part of the reason accounting never felt like a good fit was it's it lacks creativity.
Mm,
You know, it's very black and white. It's very linear. And so when I moved back to Australia, I was absolutely clear that I wanted to start some businesses. And I had a couple of businesses that I started and then, moved on from. I started a day spa, which I looked into franchising and then sold that. So I did a bunch of things that were kind of like, I guess, exploring what being an entrepreneur meant. I picked a lot of stupid businesses, like the day spa experience was seriously shaved 5 years off my life.
wow.
That was,
Why? What happened there?
oh my God. Well, that was meant to be an experience of being the silent investor. And just to give you context, 2 weeks before we were due to open, we'd done this beautiful fit out and got this premise and all this equipment. And then 2 weeks before we were due to start, the girl that I was supposed to be partnering with said, "I've changed my mind, I'm going overseas." And yeah, I mean, we had appointment books filled and it was a very, very steep learning curve. And I got to the point where by the end of that business, I learned a lot. But I also learned about staying in my lane because that was not my lane.
Can totally understand. I mean, could that have happened? I guess did they invest any money into the business before they ran off, or
No,
no?
that's exactly it. It was I was the money, they were the skills, and
Okay.
it felt like an equitable arrangement at the time. But I realised that if you don't have skin in the game, partnership to it's a difficult partnership to have work.
Yeah, I understand that, and I've been in those situations before, so I can feel for you. It's tough.
It was tough, yeah.
So you've ran a number of businesses, and you've learned a lot, and you've had a lot of experiences. Maybe let's talk a little bit about then. When did you actually delve into property? What was your first property investment purchase, or first even property?
Well, when I got back to Australia, I actually moved back in with my parents just because that was my motivation for coming back to Canberra. And in an Indian family, especially, the expectation is that you live with your parents. I mean, if they had their way, I'd live with them forever. They built this house with the, fantasy that my sister and I would move in with them, with our husbands eventually. And, as much as I love my parents at that time, it was like having a straitjacket on because, my gorgeous mum would say to me at night, "What time are you going to be home? And, are you in for dinner?" And when you're used to just coming and going as you please, it wasn't so much a restriction, but it definitely cramped my style. So I think I lasted about a year and then they went away for a weekend and I went, "I'm going to start looking for a house." And at that time, which was in 2000, the cost to own a house versus the cost of renting was about the same.
Oh, yep,
So, at that time, I just went, "Oh, well, if it's about the same, I'll just buy."
yep.
It wasn't like I had any, I'd done a bit of investing in terms of other markets, shares and things like that, but that was the first property I bought. And literally, I got a friend to come around and see a bunch of houses with me. And it was at the beginning of the boom period. I walked into the very first house on the very first day that I started looking and went, "Oh, this house has a lovely energy." And the real estate agent had been a single woman and had been taken advantage of. And she felt very empathetic towards me. So she whispered in my ear, "Salena, this is what I think this place is worth. Why don't you put in an offer?" And I mean, I didn't even have finance organized, nothing. And I put the offer in, and, I think that real estate agent might not have taken higher offers to the owner to try and support me, but I got this house, and it turned out to be an absolute gem. And in the time that most properties doubled, this one trebled in value. So that was a fluke first purchase. But after that, like, I think my now husband came to Canberra in 2001, and he was very clear that property was the pathway to growing wealth. And I was just like, nah, whatever. And, eventually and he started buying a couple of properties, and then eventually he hit his limit and needed because I was, working in management consulting at the time, earning a pretty good income. He needed me to be part of the journey. Otherwise he couldn't do it. And he would put paperwork in front of me, and I would blindly sign it. I literally just had no interest. And the most important thing for me was, I don't want to risk the house. So I don't know what we signed, but yeah, I had no interest until about 2004, at which point I went, crumbs, what have we done? What are we doing? And I was pregnant with my first child, and I thought, better have a look at this now. And once I started to look at what he was doing, I realized what was happening, and I kind of that was the point for me, at the sliding doors moment of, okay, I need to give this more attention. And I set about, I educated myself in every way possible. I bought courses. I met people. I looked everywhere. I found mentors, which is probably the biggest influencer for my success.
Yeah.
And yeah, I kind of said to my husband, step aside, I'll take it from here. And he was more than happy for me to do that. And yeah, that was kind of like the start of the journey.
Gosh, that is amazing to hear. And I love to hear that from my wife too. not letting her know. Wow, that's phenomenal. And what was your husband doing at that point in time as well?
So John is a chiropractor, and he runs a really great business. He's very successful in what he does, but he's got a different energy to me. He's very grounded. He doesn't like to, stretch himself or stress himself out. Whereas, I've got the high energy, high excitement kind of personality. So he was more than happy for me to just take the reins, and it became a bit of role reversal. It was me putting things in front of him to sign and just saying, Joe, just sign here, please. And, it's kind of been that way ever since. He just trusts me to, that I've got the energy and the experience now to just run with stuff.
Amazing. So let's talk a little bit about then the portfolio. You've built up quite a substantial portfolio since that time, and that was starting at 2000 when you purchased your first property. And as you said, that was a fluke, and that must have been an excellent experience, because now hindsight, you're looking back going, wow, lucky,
Yeah.
that worked out really well. So since then, you've probably gone through a lot of up and downs. It's been like 2 decades now. How many properties would you say you've got in your portfolio at the moment?
At the moment, we've gone up and down, but I'll probably answer that question a bit later. But the upshot of it is, like, if I incorporate all of the alternate stuff, there's quite a few. But the phase of investing that I'm in now is more about simplifying rather than volume. And, to be frank, back in the year 2000, and I don't know if you appreciate this, but you could almost throw a dart at the map of Australia and do okay. So, there's a lot of people who made a lot of money during that boom time and attribute it to high skill. But really, it was, for a lot of people, right place, right time.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I guess the reason why I asked that question is because it kind of leads us into the journey that, if you've invested quite a lot of properties in your journey, you would have experienced quite a lot of up and downs, and it'd be great to hear some of those stories. So maybe share with us during that journey of investing into all those properties, what do you think's been the worst investing moment you've ever had?
Um, there's probably a couple of things that spring to mind. I think the most painful experience, and probably the thing that caused the biggest fracture in our wealth creation journey, was in 2008 we had started to dabble in some small scale developments, and I got introduced to a fellow who was, I don't know, claimed lots of things at the time, but basically embarked on a joint venture with him developing a parcel of land on the Central Coast. It was huge, and it would have been very lucrative. But, even with all the due diligence I did, all the legal documents I put in place, I couldn't have anticipated that he would basically scam us. And at that time, we had just paid off our house. We had quite a good portfolio of property, and we were in this great position. So what we ended up doing was refinancing to do this development. It was a stretch for us. It was a multi-million-dollar subdivision, and he basically fleeced us and took the lot. And that was a very, very painful lesson to recover from. I mean, both financially, but also mentally.
Wow. So learning from that lesson there, and I mean, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit more, sort of in a little
Sure.
bit more details behind it, how was this person able to just fleece and get away with all that? Because it sounds like you sound like you're the type of
Yeah,
person who would do a lot of due diligence to make sure you
totally.
uncover everything. But how was that
Absolutely.
possible?
He was very, very clever. So it didn't happen overnight, obviously. He spent, quite a lot of time sort of getting to know us, got to know my family, almost took on a fatherly sort of, I would say, demeanor with me, and just talked a big game, took me round to see deals which he claimed were his. And I mean, I probably would have said that was the experience, which was the end of my naive period in my life. And I'm pretty vigilant. Like, I did a lot of due diligence, and the deal itself stacked up. But in the end, it was basically he had access to the funds and just drained them and took them. And then even after that happened, we tried to go around and communicate and get the funds back. We got lawyers involved. We went to ASIC. We did all this stuff. But at the end of the day, ASIC said, small fry, we're not dealing with it. And the lawyers basically just said, you could chase this for a very long time through the courts and spend tens of thousands of dollars and not get the result. So we let it go. And, John and I have worked through a lot to sort of mentally digest that. But I think there's been so much gold from that experience, now that, that I look back, because it just taught me a lot about, things that might have been overlooked, precautions that could have been taken. And certainly, the journey after that point was, well, how do I recover from this? And luckily we had a bunch of other things happen that kind of helped us mend that damage. But, when you think back to that point in time, several $100,000 was a lot of money back
Oh
then
yeah, for anyone. I mean,
for
it's not.
anyone.
Yeah.
Even now, that's a lot of money. But back then, I mean, it really hurt us. I mean, we effectively lost our house.
Wow.
So yeah, so that was a big one to recover from. But that's why now I'm such a huge advocate for people making sure that they digest the pain around any kind of financial loss, because I've supported hundreds of investors whose relationships have broken down over insignificant sums of money because they just weren't able to digest the loss. So your relationship with money and your capacity to digest, past pain and loss, and everybody loses money from time to time. If you don't, you're not really trying hard enough. But yeah, I mean, yeah, that was kind of like, there was a lot of lessons around both the due diligence side of things, the precaution side of things, and also just, learning to pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and move on.
Just curious, what would you say would have been a precautionary lesson you could have done differently, or lesson to learn from that, for I guess for people to sort of learn if this ever did happen to anyone else?
Um, I think there was just nuances in the actual contract that could have been better dealt with. And if I'd really wanted to, I could have gone back and really had a go at the lawyer that we used. So one thing is that I have now is, I don't quibble with people on fees for anything. I just pay the fee because I want the the absolute best protection. Whereas, when you start out, you're sometimes looking to save money, cut corners, and you look for cheapest property managers, cheapest conveyancers, cheapest legal support. And
Yep.
I just think you get what you pay for. So, I've learnt through that experience that vetting deals and doing good due diligence is the cornerstone of getting the right results.
And I feel the same as well too. I've been burnt a few times by going for a cheapest option, and it comes to bite you in the end. You're thinking, yeah,
Yeah,
you're saving a few bucks here and there. In the end, it costs you a lot more than a few dollars. And
100%. Yeah. Yeah.
I think you have to go through that lesson to really learn
Yeah.
it.
Exactly.
Oh, it's fascinating to hear that same feeling. I think as investors, we all go through those kind of stages as well too. On the flip side, we've talked about some of the things of the challenges that you faced, but on the flip side, during your journey, are you able to share with us maybe an amazing moment where you had an aha time that went, wow, this is the best thing that's happened along the journey, or just clicked with you and said, okay, I gotta, do more of this.
Yeah, look, it's a great question. And there's probably lots of moments where, you know, things went really well and I thought, oh, that's a great win. I know we did a development in Melbourne that, basically got us a $500,000 profit in a very short space of time. And you might look at that on the surface and go, wow, what a great win. But it actually was a really painful experience. The builder went bankrupt just prior to completion, and I was flying down to Melbourne every week to try and push it along. And so it was a great outcome overall, but that taught me a lot about you've really got to define what success looks like as an investor. And, I made the decision from that moment onwards that I wasn't going to expose myself to that level of risk again. And so I've done a lot of small scale developments since, but significantly lower risk. And there's, you would understand there's even within investing, there's such a spectrum of, investments that require virtually no effort through to those where you're super active. And in 2009, I think the aha moment that came to me was we had a really good portfolio at that point, a mix of commercial and residential property. And I started to really, use my accounting skills to kind of project, well, at what point are we going to be financially free? We had a high net worth. And when I did the numbers, and we'd already been investing for, nearly a decade at that point, when I did the numbers, I realized that in order for us to replace our living expenses and have that freedom to step off, it was going to be another 25 years. And that's when I went, oh God, this whole fixation with net worth being the ultimate metric can't be right. And around that same time, we'd just bought a commercial property here in Canberra, and the banks had basically turned around to us and said, look, you no more. We're not going to give you any more money right now. And so, I had a choice at that point to kind of hit a wall and then go, well, we've done pretty well. Let's just sit on what we've got and wait that 25 years. Or kind of ask the question, what else? And, I think one of the skills that really good investors have is that capacity to be tenacious, to be determined, and to ask the question, what else? And so that was really the aha, was recognizing that long game, like property's a long game. And yes, you can make chunk deals, and I get that. But driving up my net worth wasn't going to get me any closer to my dreams around financial freedom. So I started to explore other opportunities, other markets, other ways of doing things. And that's how I stumbled into the alternate space. And that was the sliding door moment in terms of really a new game for me.
Wow. Now let's talk about that. Actually, since we're on that topic, it'd be very interesting to share with the audience. We're talking about this alternate space because, as you said, you hit a big brick wall and the bank won't lend you any more money. Was it the cash flow at this point in time that in your portfolio was not generating enough cash flow to be able to replace your daily living expenses, or was it something else? And that's why you looked into that space?
Yeah, I think pretty much, like, it's all well and good to say you've got so many million as a net worth, but you have to work. And
Mm,
that is, I've worked with so many people who have staggering net worth, like way more than me. And they are in so much financial pain and they have to keep hustling. They have to keep working to support their lifestyle or eat the cow, meaning sell down assets to, get off the Ferris wheel.
mm,
So the thing that, I would say I've really, embraced is there's this idea that you have to do the hard yards and you have to use traditional investments to build up your capital base. And property for me is definitely the best vehicle to do that. So there's no avoiding that. But I think what happens is people kind of hang their hat on this idea that they have to be a certain net worth to have it be game over for them. And what I am experiencing and what I'm doing right now is showing people you don't actually need as much of a net worth as you think. At that point in time where, part one of the game is build a capital base. Part two of the game, as far as I'm concerned, is how do you take that capital and start to turn the dial and put a tinier percentage of your portfolio into alternate to ramp up the cash flow so that instead of waiting, 20, 30 years to replace that income, you can do it in a really short space of time. Like I'm talking, 3 to 5 years. So that, and then once you've done that, then part three of the game, as far as I'm concerned, is, how do you turn all of that income into annuities and a family bank and all of those, things that people give lip service to around legacy, but how do you make that really concrete and real?
wow, I love that three-step process, and it's so simple and clear, and I think a lot of people can easily follow that, and that's why I think a lot of people follow what you've been doing as well. And what I'm just curious about then is when you said that second, I guess the second time around, which is to actually turn them into alternate sources to be able to generate, more cash flow or whatever it is. How do you go about doing that? What kind of sources are we talking about?
So, yeah, back in '09, when I hit that wall, I just started looking at, well, what else is out there? And I think the thing that probably had the exponential impact in my world was looking for people who had the results that I wanted. And I searched the globe. Like I didn't restrict myself to the Australia and New Zealand part of the world. I was like, what are people doing in other part of the world? And I found mentors and people in other markets, and I got a chance to look over their shoulder and just see what they were doing. And tapping into, following the models that somebody else has already created is definitely better than trying to do it yourself, I would definitely say. And I started to hear about, opportunities. And, you even hear it here in Australia. You hear about opportunities that don't come onto the market, that are off market, that are, out of the reach of most people who are trawling the net looking for opportunities. And I think particularly in the US market. So I looked at the European and the US markets. But what I liked about the US market, particularly at that time, is, from a mechanics point of view, it's very similar to what we have here. The strategies exist in Australia as they do over there. But the problem that we have with the Australian market and why I started to kind of get more interested in that US space at the time is that I think the Australian market is fantastic for building up capital. It's awesome. In fact, there's not many markets in the world that match it.
Yes.
But for cash flow, it's terrible. I mean,
Mhm.
the typical cash flow for properties held without any debt, so no encumbrances at all, is between 1% and 2.5%. And if you own $1 million property, me personally, I think that's a pretty shit return. Like
Yeah.
that seems terrible to me.
It's crap.
Yeah. So by putting small amounts of money into some of these alternate strategies where I could all day long get 8 to 15% net returns, you can start to see you don't need to put a whole lot of money into it in order to, 5x your cash flow. And that's why that market is so exciting for me. And the reason it works is because our market is all about capital because it's become very efficient. There are so many people who are interested in property and you have to fight for deals here. So even though you would still say it's not as efficient as the share market, it's if you look at it on a global level, Australia has a very efficient property market. In the States, it's a very different matter. There's this space of real estate investing in the market, which is incredibly inefficient. And because of that, it means that there are all these unconventional opportunities which are just not available to the masses. It's really the playground of the ultra wealthy.
Wow. It's fascinating to hear that. And I think that's the reason why, even for myself in the last couple of years or so, because capital growth has increased so much, it's become so expensive to purchase property, especially in Sydney and Melbourne, those states. People have looked at alternative places. And one place that they've talked about is moving into commercial space.
Yes.
Commercial has been a very, very big area that a lot of people talked about probably last year, and it probably slowed down a little bit due to COVID, unfortunately. And you would have experienced that because you've got commercial properties in your portfolio as well. And then from there, it's like, okay, what next? You could look at commercial and get great returns, but you still have to put a lot of capital in there. And then also
Yeah.
the banks only, provide certain LVRs, and you can get capped out from there. And I know I personally looked over in the States, and when I was looking at some of the deals, even from a few people who were telling me about them, I could pick up like properties for 50, 60, even up to 100K reasonably, and still get a close to about a 15 to 20% return. And I'm like, wow, why am I not doing that? So,
So yeah,
yeah,
look, I agree with everything you're saying, and what I would add is, a lot of my clients have commercial property, and yes, it has been flavour of the month for the last couple of years, and I do like commercial property, but it's a game of snakes and ladders as well.
yeah,
Um, you know, higher returns, but often associated higher risks, and most of the people that I work with who own commercial property, at best, after they service their loans, they're making 3-4%. So we're still talking a marginally better
yeah,
step up, but still not epic money. And the deals that you're talking about in the States, which is buying property, is only one out of the 8 strategies that I've started to focus on. So when I started over there, I thought that was what everybody meant by US real estate, is just you buy properties. But that is, managing property from afar, tenants and toilets and all of that stuff is a big headache. And I got so many cuts and bruises along the way. What I believe now, out of all the strategies in the alternate space, is that one, owning direct property, is my least favorite out of all of them. So that's why what's really exciting for me about the alternate opportunity in the States is you can put small amounts of money into each deal. You can put as little as 5, 20, 50, 100K, depending on the opportunity. You can do true diversification. You can diversify geographically, from a liquidity point, from an exit point of view. There's so many different layers to it. So, we talk in Australia about diversification, and really what it means is, well, I bought a house in New South Wales, so let me go and buy one in Victoria now. And in the alternate space, because the dollars per deal are so small, it's really about diversification across strategy and all those other things that I talked about. So the idea of owning houses is great, but it's bottom of my pile now in terms of the strategies. I want to control the deals. I don't necessarily want to own and be responsible for the tenants and maintenance and all that rubbish.
okay. Which is really, and I agree with you. I think that's kind of a really smart strategy because you mitigate the risk. If you're just controlling but not having to own, because anything happens in say 6, 12, we didn't even know the pandemic would come along. There is absolutely no control of how properties change and move from there. So would you mind sharing with us then these kind of 8 strategies on a sort of top level view, what they are?
Sure. So obviously there's the traditional one that you're talking about, which is, just buying property. Um, you go to a bank, you get leverage and you purchase, or you just purchase in cash. The strategies, there's probably 4 buckets, and there within each bucket there's variations, but the 4 buckets are, direct ownership, lending deals where you become the bank, joint venture deals, meaning you partner with someone and you get paid a rate of interest. So it's a hybrid between a lending deal and a direct ownership deal, and you get a share of the profit at the end of the development. And then the 4th bucket is syndications, where you're, a group of you going in. And sorry, I'll add a 5th bucket, which is the main bucket that most of my guys like, which is the small private funds. So syndications is a bunch of people, one specific project, and private funds is a bunch of people, but the fund manager has the capacity to get involved in multiple projects at the same time. Could be business loans, multi-unit complexes, all sorts of things.
Yep. Yep. And with those ones, especially like say, for example, going to like a syndication or fund manager, in Australia, obviously there's slightly different rules and regulations and all that kind of stuff around it. How does that work overseas?
From which sense? From a tax?
From I guess maybe in terms of regulation point of view, like with funds here, they're quite highly regulated in here, and you have to go through quite a lot of paperwork and also
Yeah, well, I mean,
licensing.
I'm not setting up the funds, so it's
Yeah.
not me that runs the funds, and I don't get paid based on anything anyone invests in. So, one of the attributes that I really think is important that you develop as an investor is being very agnostic, meaning, being unbiased by everybody else's opinion and what the market's saying, and really being able to, understand and look at deals on their own merit. So, um, the funds over there, quite right, are extremely well regulated. But a lot of these small private funds, they operate in a space that is too small for the big hedge funds and the REITs, and way too big for your average mum and dad investor. So what that, they're very nimble. They can take on big deals, small deals, and each fund has their own, flavor of what they do. But the caliber of people, I mean, and this comes back to network. One thing that I prize is the network, and a lot of the guys that I work with that run these funds, they won't work with you if you're just some, unknown off the street. They're a very insular private network. And when they say, look, there's a deal here, they'll fund it really quickly. They don't need anybody's money. So they're not the sort of people that will go out looking to the public to raise money. It's a very private network. And the interesting thing is, because we are described as aliens, a lot of those opportunities are, they're like, if you were a local, they'd say, oh, are you a sophisticated investor? Have you got a net worth over this? But because we're foreign, they don't care.
Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah, I've heard about that overseas, because in order to be part of these funds, they do ask, for more documentation, checking if you've got a certain network, sophisticated investors, quite a common thing that they do ask over there. And what kind of things, like what kind of returns would you be expecting from these kind of things like you've experienced so far?
Look, I'm being slightly more aggressive than the average Joe, and with the people that I work with, my job is to figure out, what's a fit for them and what their appetite is. But typically, on the more traditional stuff, you can get 8 to 15% net returns. On some of the joint ventures and other lending opportunities, by the time you factor in your profit share, you can get returns of 18 to 24%, because of that market inefficiency. And I know it sounds like they must be super risky or something, but in all seriousness, when you unpack the deals and you understand how the strategies work, and you understand that these deals don't need a rising market, they don't care whether there's economic turbulence, and you contrast that to the uncertainty in our market right now, you start to see that the relative risk is actually lower than what we experience in the Australian market.
Yeah, and I mean, I would have to agree with you, because I'm already involved in those type of markets as well here, understandably. And when people ask me how am I able to get like between 15 and 30% returns on these deals that I'm working on right now, and they're secured, and there's a lot of possibilities that there's more to it. People just don't believe it, and I can understand, because we've all been conditioned that
Correct.
in this market, you expect maybe 3% return at most. In Sydney markets, up in Brisbane, you might be able to get a 7% net yield, and you go, okay, that's what everyone expects. It's just, I guess, changing the mindset and then really understanding, unpacking the deal. And I think that's kind of where you've kind of gone, further, because it's a matter of opportunity cost. If you're going to invest your money and put it in something for the next 10 years, potentially those 10 years you could have actually accumulated maybe a, um, compounded, say 15% return, instead of saying getting a 7% return. And at the end of the day, which is going to perform better? Well, I think the obvious answer would be the second one, because it compounds at a greater rate. So it's just really, I guess, changing a mindset. And working with different people to understand that. And once they understand it, it actually does work really, really well. Is that what you've kind of experienced as well from your side of things?
It's such a great point you raise, but and you know, I'm all for healthy skepticism. My training has made me a very conservative person, um, and yet people are so suspicious and skeptical about these opportunities. I had what's it called when someone trolls you?
Oh yeah.
I've had people definitely troll me and say, "Oh, this is, you know, this has got to be a scam," or, you know, but I have zero involvement in the investments that the people around me make. I don't have, you know, my role is to support and give them access, but I don't get paid and I don't, you know, have any involvement. But, you know, I feel I love Australian property and it is awesome, as I said, for building capital. But I got tired of relying on a rising market to make money, and I got tired of it's hard work finding good deals in our market. So, you know, what I feel is right now, my plan A is building cash flow through these alternate strategies, which, by the way, all exist here in Australia. They're just not plentiful.
Mm.
But finding consistent deals is not as easy as it sounds. And my worldview is that the world is full of undervalued opportunities, and that's all I'm doing is tapping into those. It's there's no smoke and mirrors. There's no they exist. It's just that they're not
Yeah.
mainstream.
And also people just don't talk about them because they're
Yeah.
fearful of what could potentially be. You know, it sounds risky because it's the unknown. And usually because of that, there's that opportunity that comes out. And I think that's where we as educated investors, we try our best to try and understand these things as well and you know, learn from each other from that point
Totally.
of view. Mm. Okay. So I'm also wondering if we talk a little bit more about what you're currently doing at the moment. Is that the main focus that you're helping with your clients because you're no longer working in management accounting or management
Oh
consulting anymore? Yeah.
God, I haven't had a job for.
Yeah.
I don't even know if I'm employable, to be frank. I said that to my husband. Like, if I ever had to go back to a job, I don't think anyone would give me a job. No, I've kind of been out of corporate world for 15 years now
Yeah.
plus.
So what have you been doing for the last 15 years then?
Well, being a mum was a big part of the last 15 years. That sucked up a lot of time, space, and energy. Um, you know, I've done lots of things. I was an avid share trader. I've tried lots of things. And then ultimately, as the property stuff just started to give the best returns, I just let go of everything else and just focused on that. And you know, it was never the case that I set out to start a business in this. I just started to have people ask me, well, how did you do that? And could you help me with that? And it just sort of evolved from there. And for the last probably 6 or 7 years prior to starting the Freedom Warrior program, you know, I was helping people find things in Australia, like pointing them in the right direction. I'm not a buyer's agent. I just used to, you know, hand them on to people who were buyer's agents, but helping them, you know, I think of myself as a strategist because I have that problem solving ability. But you know, it's really only in the last 2 years that I kind of went, I don't actually want to work that hard. And I want to work with fewer betters. I want to work with people who get the concept of what I'm saying, which is you don't have to wait till you're 65 to retire. You can get there in the next 18 months, 2 years, if you do the right things and you embrace some of this alternate stuff. So my attitude is, and I know this is a really, you know, babyish metaphor, but you know, I'm driving this bus and I'm going in this direction. If you want to join me on that journey, jump on the bus. Yeah, come with me. That's kind of where I'm at.
Fantastic. And that's what it sounds like from the heart. You know, you're genuinely there to help people and you've got a strong why behind that because you've achieved it for yourself. You know, you've built a portfolio, you've built up, you know, not having to work, you know, for the last 15 years. There's already proof there that you're genuinely here to help because, you know, I know a lot of successful property investors who are in the market doing exactly the same thing and they're really, really passionate and wanting to be part of that and just people on journey because I think once you've reached that point where you've got enough success, it's whether or not you just want to continue to enjoy your life or you go out and leave a legacy and help others. And I can see that's where you're going down at this point in time. So it's great.
Yeah, look, I think I help with two ends of the spectrum. I help business owners who are kind of wanting to build that exit ramp from their business, and they're worried about whether or not they'll sell or not.
Mm.
And then at the other end, I love working with teenagers. So I've done a lot of work in the teenage market, just helping them understand the basics of stewardship and investing and looking after money, and understanding that, you can be the driver of your own financial success, and it doesn't matter what you earn. And I never had a high income, I should add, ever.
Great. Let's talk a little bit more about the mindset side of things since we're on this topic right now. In terms of, say, mentors or resources, I know you touched on it a little bit as well, that you actually did a lot of exploration, did a lot of courses and so forth at the beginning of your journey. In, say, maybe the last few years, what kind of resources have you tapped into, or who are the mentors that you've been using to help you accelerate your journey now?
Yeah, look, I mean, I spent a small fortune on every property course and book that was out there back in the day. And they were helpful, and they gave me a baseline understanding of different strategies and how they worked and all that sort of stuff. But I still say the single biggest driver of my success was the mentors and the masterminds that I sort of became part of. And there's probably been a number of people along the way, but they weren't famous. They're not like celebrities or anything like that. They're just regular Joes who happen to have a great capacity to create wealth, and it's effortless for them, and there's no charge around it. They're not stressed about it. They're not money hungry. They're just, I think alignment on the values front is really important. So I'm actually relatively frugal. So I found that a lot of the people that I took on as mentors were also relatively frugal. The purpose of money is not necessarily the fancy homes and the big houses and all of that. It's really that capacity to influence that matters the most. So mentors are many and varied, and both from the wealth space as well as from I've had a long love affair with all things yogic. And, so I've had some phenomenal mentors in the getting your headspace right.
Yeah, great. Any particular books that you've recently read, or you still go back to from time to time, that you could recommend to our listeners, or even audiobooks if you listen to any of them?
Yeah, there's a couple that come to mind. One that I've read a few times, and it's it's a very old style book, but it's one that you've probably read, which is The Millionaire Next Door.
Love that.
It's old. It's like 25 years old or something like that. But I think the principles in that book still stand true today. And there's some great things in there. And there's a formula that I kind of put my own tweak on that I pulled out of that, which is if you take your average household age and multiply it by your average gross household income and divide by 10, that should give you your expected net worth. Now, because of the way that the property market and affordability has changed, I actually have changed the formula a little bit, and I say your average household age multiplied by your gross income divided by 5. That's my take on that. But that should give you your expected net worth. Now, if you're above or below that, that gives you a barometer as to how effectively are you creating wealth. So I love that book. I just think it's lots of great concepts, and just a reminder that there's no magic formula. It's just spend less than you earn and invest.
Totally. It's a great reminder to go back to that book, actually, for myself, and I'm pretty sure the listeners would admire that as well too. If you had a chance to go back and meet yourself, say 10 years ago, what do you think you would have said to her?
Oh, it's a great question. I think the biggest part of the journey for me has been the head game, getting your head in the right space and being clear about what matters. And I think I wasted a lot of time going down a lot of rabbit holes because I wasn't sure, and I didn't back myself. And, it's a little bit like the experience of seeing things on Facebook and Instagram, and it just looks like everybody else has the perfect world and the perfect life. And it's probably as I've got crankier and older, that I say, I just have to back myself a bit more. And I think definitely feeling an experience of the imposter syndrome from time to time has plagued me. But, I'm a bit more comfortable in my own shoes now. So I think, yeah, the message I would give to myself is, back yourself a bit more.
Fantastic. So let's talk about the future. If you go forward in, say, the next 5 years, what do you think would be some of the exciting plans that you've got?
Oh, lots of things. Well, one thing that's kind of on the radar for the goals for the next 10 years is maybe a move to somewhere coastal. My husband and I both love places like Newcastle, and he's a real beach goer. So something like that, that's kind of one thing that I'm excited about. But I love, if we're talking wealth and property, I love the idea that I've got a plan A, B, and C. Like, it's kind of like plan A is I'm just continuing to build cash flow through these alternate strategies. I'm not overexposing myself at all. I've got still a great portfolio of assets here in Australia, which is my plan B. And then my plan C is obviously all the traditional things that I don't really believe in, but super and all that stuff. But I feel, I can't even tell you, when you know that there's going to be money coming in, whether you get out of bed or not, whether the market craps itself. And obviously the last year has been a very scary time for a lot of people. But if you knew that even if the wheels came off the economy, even if business, it wasn't business as usual tomorrow, and you still had money coming in and you didn't have to eat the cow, I just think that's such a freeing place to be. And I just wish that for everyone. I feel really sad. I spoke to a guy earlier this week who was 70, such a sweet guy, has been running a business all his life, is barely making ends meet, and is now at the point where he knows he can't step, even at age 70, he can't step off. And I have real empathy for people who, feel that they've got a higher purpose, but just can't work out how to access that.
Mm, yeah, it's sad sometimes, and I think if we can some way or shape help them, even just I guess maybe just giving them I don't even know how to describe it, but I think I know what you've been able to sort of give him sort of an insight. There's still hope. Maybe that's the word for it, hope. Then I think we've done our inspiration to be able to provide for others. And yeah, that's kind of where I feel the same. If we can help them just genuinely in one shape or form, it doesn't have to be giving them everything, but just at least something small to give them some glimpse of hope. I think they'll be able to succeed in some shape or form. So I've got this last question I've got for you is, out of all your successes, you built a great portfolio, you found alternative ways, and you've helped so many people around the world and Australia as well too. How much of that is success is due to intelligence, skill, and hard work, and how much of that is due to luck?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Um, I genuinely believe I'm a very lucky person, and I have massive gratitude for the journey that I've been on and the people that I've met. But I think there's that definition, which I'll probably get wrong, but where opportunity meets preparation, the intersection of those two things is really, the dictator of the results that you get. So it's luck and also being prepared and in the right mind space. When you start looking for opportunity and you really become laser focused about it, you just see it everywhere. So I would say it's probably where those two circles meet.
Perfect. Yeah, it's exactly what I was thinking as well too. Great. Well, thank you so much, Salena, for coming onto the podcast today. If listeners want to reach out to you to find out a little bit more about what you do, or even just have a further chat about the alternative strategies that you've just mentioned today, what's the best way they can reach out to you?
Oh, look, you can get me on all the socials, and I've got a lot of free resources and things on my website. I have actually just developed a very cool calculator, which if anyone's interested in getting access to, I'm happy to share that as well, which actually shows you what trajectory you're on and when you're likely to retire if you don't change anything. So it's a great little visual.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that research. And once again, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. It's been a pleasure to be able to have you on. And thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thanks, Tyrone. It's been awesome.